from the top. This one kind of like hurt me. Hello everybody, welcome to my lair. My name is Megan Stark. I'm a motorcyclist, web developer, graphic designer, gal about town, and today I wanted to talk about women in motorcycling, and more specifically, why don't more women ride? I have some theories of my own, and I also posited the question to my handful of followers on Instagram, so we can get into some of their responses. But first, I want to lay the groundwork of women in motorcycling. Most of these statistics that I'll be recounting are from the Motorcycle Industry Council, and I haven't been seeing any new articles coming out about more recent statistics, but we have the 2018 surveys to reference. So we can assume that there's been a little bit of growth. I think that's probably fair to say.
Before we get too far into this, I wanted to make note of the fact that MIC, the Motorcycle Industry Council, only polled 2,400 adults nationwide for this survey. And to me, that's not a very large sample size, so take that with a grain of salt when you listen to some of these statistics. You also have to wonder what type of a person is more likely to respond to a survey, because I do recall receiving an MIC survey in the mail before and not responding, so I wonder if women are just eager to be represented and are more willing to respond to a survey, so that could skew the results higher. All things to think about, extra factors that might not be immediately apparent in the data. So that being said, let's look at the data.
As of 2018, 19 to 20% of bikers in America are female. These statistics are obviously going to vary in different countries. There are a lot of countries where it's probably more than 20%, especially if it's a primary mode of getting around. But in the USA, it's about 20% as of 2018, and I venture to guess it's a little bit higher nowadays. This is up from 9.6% in 2003, and in 2015, the number was 14%. So those are pretty large gains. In terms of the age demographics of these female riders, among millennials, women make up 26% of riders, so it's higher amongst millennials. And among Gen Xers, women make up 22% of riders. So if we lump in everybody, as of 2018, it's 19 to 20% of riders are female, but if we break it down by the younger demographics, it's going up. And Gen Z is just now kind of entering the age brackets where they can get motorcycle licenses. So it'll be kind of interesting to see if they adopt it more fervently or on the same path as other generations. And I myself find myself to be a millennial, pretty smack dab in the middle millennial, I think. So there's a lot of other pretty interesting statistics about female riders that I wanted to just share with you because it hasn't really happened on this channel before. Some of the stats that can be found from different organizations can suggest that women tend to be safer riders, and sometimes that is because they're on smaller displacement vehicles, so they're less at risk to go high speeds and do more reckless activities. It's not just the fact that maybe they're riding smaller bikes or they're more cautious people. It says that 71% of motorcycle riders state that they have taken at least one motorcycle training course during their lifetime. And 60% of women regularly undergo rider safety courses as of 2013, compared to just 42% of men. And I ventured to guess that that was the case anyways. When I took my motorcycle safety course, half of the people in the course were female. There are a couple women who are more middle-aged, and there was, I think, one or two women that were around my age or in their 20s. I bet that this continues to increase as people get more access to riding courses and they learn that that's a good way to get started. It'll be interesting to see how these statistics grow. While ultimately you can't determine how safe of a rider you're going to be just because you took a rider safety course, it certainly cannot hurt, and I encourage everyone to if you're considering starting to ride a motorcycle. So we also have some stats on what types of bikes women are riding, and this is all two-wheel culture in general. So 34% of female riders ride cruisers, 33% are on scooters, and 10% are on sport bikes. And I don't even know where my bike falls into these categorizations. Mine is ultimately a modern classic, but because it's a Ducati, I suppose you could call it a sport bike. It's just not as sport performance as a lot of bikes on the street. So I wouldn't really lump myself in the high horsepower category of things. One more habit that I wanted to bring up about women riders is that according to these studies, 49% of women prefer to work on their own bikes rather than taking it to a shop. And for me, it's a little bit double-edged. Obviously, routine maintenance once you do it, you realize that it's not rocket science to do so, but obviously you don't want to postpone important safety checks or check-ins with your mechanic in general. So a bit double-edged. I know some people who like to, some people who don't, some people who just are the scrappiest people ever and build these bikes from scratch. It runs the whole gamut, just like it does with men. So now that we got some facts and figures out of the way, I wanted to discuss more of why women don't ride as frequently as men do. And this doesn't have to be a situation where it's 50-50 male-female. That's not my agenda. I have no agenda. I just want to discuss these things. So I posed a question to the women who follow me on Instagram. If you're interested in riding, what is stopping you? And I got some interesting responses, and I got some responses that were not surprising to me at all. So I wanted to go through some of those, start a little conversation, and then maybe we can talk some more in the comments and more people can share what's holding them back. Maybe if you used to ride and you stopped, what's the reason there? There's a lot of directions that this could go, and either which way, there's no judgment one way or the other, obviously. Everyone has their reasons, and most of these reasons are perfectly reasonable. So from the top, this one kind of like hurt me. And this one said, mostly mom guilt. After working full time, I feel like they deserve my time more than I deserve time by myself. And I am not a mother, so I can only speculate on this stuff, but I imagine that especially if you have young kids, it can be so difficult. And that's probably a natural time that a lot of women take a break from riding, or it's like a bit of a crossroads. It's easier if you got into it beforehand, and it's harder perhaps like the more into child rearing you get, and then they just demand more of your time. And then there's a bit of a social or societal pressure to be as safe as possible so you can be there for them. So motorcycling isn't knitting. It comes with a lot of risk factors. So I think that dissuades a lot of people from it. And the guilt factor is something that I think is put more on women than it is on men by and large. Not that men are completely guiltless and get to go through life doing whatever they want, but just it's more frequent that the mom guilt plays a role more than dad guilt does. Aside from mom guilt, another layer of guilt is just general familial guilt. Someone wrote in and she said, I'll have to hide it from my family and feel guilty that they may find out through me getting badly hurt. And I know that that can probably be a really devastating reason. You don't want to cause your loved ones to be concerned about you. And, there's definitely times in life where you got to risk it for the biscuit and you have to do things that maybe the people in your life don't feel comfortable with or aren't supportive of, but oftentimes they'll come around. And my advice for this type of thing is to, if they're like relatively reasonable people and aren't going to freak out, just tell them the steps you're taking to be as safe as possible. Maybe tell them some parameters that when you first start out, maybe you won't be riding at night. Maybe you won't be riding during rush hour. These things that you can incrementally get confident on, because it is kind of a world of difference the more miles you get under your belt and the more comfortable you get on the bike. There's just far fewer mistakes. Granted, you're always going to be at risk of getting an accident with other people, but you can certainly reduce your risk and be as responsible as possible. And then, like I said in my fear of riding video, there comes a time when you just have to get out and do it. So if it's something that you're ultimately not comfortable with, maybe you can revisit in a couple of years. But I think it'd be really great just to get that experience on the bike and see how you like it by taking a course or by doing something in a closed environment in a safe situation where you can just experiment a little bit and are not liable to get too injured. One very straightforward answer was weather, and I feel that if it's downpouring rain and you need to commute to work, having a motorcycle is not ideal, but you can always have a backup plan and maybe have a car and a bike. Snow was another one in the weather category, and another person responded saying they were nervous about potentially having an accident. Yeah, riding on the road near crazies, which is super valid, especially when the weather warms up and maybe if you're in an area where there ends up being more traffic in general. The crazies come out in the summertime, I feel like. Definitely being a very vigilant rider can help you a lot. And if someone seems to be really chaotic, like I am in no ego competitions with people on the road. So if someone wants to race me or if someone wants to get to a light or get past me, I'm just always going to let them go because it's certainly not worth getting bent out of shape over. It's better to just stay safe. One person wrote in and said that they were looking for a mentor. And I found this really interesting because, this is just an assumption I'm making, but I would venture to guess that a lot of women would appreciate having someone kind of guide them through the process. And I think that's where the internet culture of riding is so helpful. I know some people find it like tedious to have these conversations about riding. They're like, man, I just ride, like why are you gonna make a big deal out of everything? But these kinds of conversations are really helpful for people who might be nervous, not know where to start, not have access to a riding group or friends to help them get into it. And so the internet is their primary mode, and you can watch Revzilla stuff all day long or go to these channels that are a little bit more polished, but there's something about just real people sharing their real experiences that is really valuable. And I find it valuable in a lot of different spheres, and hopefully other people find it valuable in the motorcycle world. And that's kind of why I feel compelled to make the content that I do. And I hope I can always pretty much keep it real around here and let you know that you don't have to know everything before you get into riding. Like, you got to know some basics, and you got to know how to look out for yourself and some of the key gear components. But other than that, a lot of us are just learning as we go, and you don't wake up one morning with 5 years of experience without 5 years of trial and error. And lastly, a couple of responses from women who have not started riding that say that they were interested in doing so but haven't gotten around to it was the financial investment. Some people said financial freedom, which I'm assuming that kind of meant, you know, in their progress towards financial freedom, motorcycling is an expense that they don't want to incorporate into their lives. And I definitely can understand where they're coming from. And honestly, if it weren't for the fact that motorcycling is part of my plan towards financial freedom, I gotta wonder if I would be shouldering so much expense for it as well. Because especially if you kind of want to get something a little fancy, if you want to get some good looking gear, and if you want to make this a decent chunk of your life, sometimes there can be a bit of an upfront expense. I think it'd be helpful to maybe do a breakdown of all the miscellaneous expenses associated with motorcycling outside of just maintenance and buying the bike. There's just so many little things that you might not think about. And some people get into riding thinking it's going to be cheaper than owning a car, and are sorely mistaken when they find out that just because they bought a 1970s Honda on the cheap doesn't mean that their life is going to now be easy. So I think finances is a huge unfortunate reason why people don't get into riding, men and women alike. But that's kind of the long and short of why more women don't ride according to their own responses. I think there's a lot of cultural influence, and you know, there's a lot of different studies about the natural distribution of how men and women tend to behave, and how men tend to take on more risk and women tend to do more homey or communal things as their hobbies and activities. So obviously not everybody is exactly on that binary, but it's definitely why probably a lot fewer women ride than men ride. It just is the nature of things. But I think it's cool that it's a growing demographic. It'd be cool if like a quarter of all women, or it'd be cool if a quarter of all riders end up being women. And I know it's different depending on where you live. So give me your best guess about where you're at. How many riders do you think are female? I feel like the distribution is pretty accurate for Milwaukee, but granted, I'm a little bit more in touch with the scene, so I see more female riders. But you know, if you did it by the mean or the average, just picking out a pack of riders, it probably feels a lot lower than that. And I think the more we educate people on riding, the more we can loop more people into it, and we'll all have a great time. So I think that's all for today. Let me know what you think in the comments. Why do you think more women don't ride? And what's your opinion on the guilt factor that I think plagues a lot of people in general, but especially women? If you enjoyed this video, you should give me a subscribe if you're not already part of the little family. Give it a like. And until next time, ride safe.